It is Wednesday. No, it's not. It's Thursday, May 1st, 2025. And welcome to Human School. My name is Carlos Whittaker, and I'm so excited you're here. If you're watching on YouTube and you see a presence behind me, this is the cutout of me that I took on tour a few years ago. Things got wild on the Human School live stream for the Human School course last night. That's why it's there. Hey, listen, that's not what I want to talk about today. Today, I want to talk about one of your new favorite people that you don't even know. And when I say this, I mean literally this man is going to change the way you think about grieving, about death, about loss, and he's going to breathe hope into your lungs like you haven't had before. Because today, ladies and gentlemen, we have your brand new friend, Joon Park, or JS Park as he is known on Instagram. This man is a hospital chaplain, and I can't think of a better person that has literally been with thousands of people as they have taken their last breath, families as they have mourned. And he's got a hope for those of you that experience loss today like you haven't experienced in a long time. This is going to be an incredible time of healing for all of us. Y'all ready? Here we go. Your new friend, JS Park. Okay, Human School family, I am with my new friend, and I say new friend because unfortunately for him, there's not a lot of people that I follow on the internet that I'm just like, oh my gosh, like what are they doing today? Oh, look at his cute kids. Oh, like what's happening? And Joon JS Park is one of those people. And so I just reached out on, I think, was it a DM maybe I sent you?
I think it was, yeah.
I think it was. I mean, look at how this works. And so unfortunately for him, he's going to end up being a friend of mine for a long time. He just doesn't know it yet. So this is the beginning. You are all invited into the beginning of this relationship. But I'm just so excited. And I'm actually, I asked you before, do you want me to call you Joon? Do you want me to call you JS? You're like, well, like the online persona of who I am is kind of like JS, but Joon is kind of who I am in real life. And I was like, I'm going with Joon. I love it.
Perfect.
So Joon, let's start off, I think, the conversation. This is called Human School. And so let's talk about Joon as a human when he was a kid. Okay, so I'm talking to kid Joon human. What did the kid version of you want to be when he grew up into a big human? What was he always thinking he wanted to be when he was a big human?
Carlos, what an awesome, big, like cool question to ask right up front.
Yes.
You know, and so cool that you asked that. And I got to say how thrilled I am to just join your table.
Oh, thank you, man.
Thank you, Carlos. And, I likewise read your stuff all the time. And I lift up you, I lift up your father and your family.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Kid Joon. I got to say, Carlos, I say this in the context of I was often scared and lonely as a kid. Grew up in a traumatic and turbulent household, very unpredictable.
Yeah.
Son to immigrant parents. And they did not have the tools, skill set, capacity, resources. This is a familiar and common story of immigrant families. And I've since reconciled with them. And at the same time, I carry with me the pain that was dealt to me through the violence they experienced ancestrally generations back.
Sure.
From war-torn, imperialized Korea through a history of just deep and disturbing violence. And so I grew up in that context. And I remember even very early on as a child thinking, I hope one day to be a voice, ears and eyes, open hands for those who are scared and lonely, for those who felt like they didn't have a voice. I thought that early on, really, I did. And even real little, I felt like, you know that feeling, Carlos, when I'm sure all of us know this feeling when you're a kid and you get pulled to like a gathering with your parents or with adults.
Oh, yeah.
And you're just looking up at everybody and, you just see a bunch of coattails and,
Totally.
You're looking up the sides of people and everyone feels so much bigger. And there's already a power discrepancy, physically, but just that loneliness of always feeling like I'm looking up at the world.
Yeah.
And sort of the fear of what might these people do to me. And, because everything was so hostile at home and I didn't know what that night was going to be like, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I wanted to be in a place where I felt like I could use any leverage, power, voice that I had to, nobody is truly silent. They're silenced. And so how can I not be a microphone for them, but pass the microphone to them?
Yeah.
And so even when I was real little, if I saw an animal in distress, I would run over to that animal and try to help out. Because I thought, I don't have a lot of power, but I'm bigger than this animal, just like all these adults are bigger than me. And I would take in like squirrels and birds and all kinds of things. And, that was kind of the heart that I had. And you know that feeling, Carlos, when you just feel like you're so diminished and small, but it's like, with a little bit that I have, what can I do?
Yeah. Gosh, you talk about being the son of immigrant parents. I'm the exact same way, right? So my dad came from Panama, my mom came from Mexico, and I was actually I've never told this story before, but I was doing a experiential therapy, kind of group therapy session at some point in my life. I go to therapy a lot. And at this point in my life, they had me like construct a 3D model of my family with other people in the room. So like I got my father and you be my dad, you be my mom, you be my brother. And then I kind of put them together and I was like, okay, look, here's my family. There's me, there's my mom, my dad. And my therapist said, you do notice how you have set everyone up. Your parents are looking at each other and their backs are towards you and your brother. And I remember in that moment, like, because I'd always said, I had the perfect childhood. But all of a sudden in that moment, I was like, holy cow. Like I suddenly realized how you said this. They didn't have the tools to be able to probably invite me into a healthy family structure the way that maybe we have more tools to be able to do that with our kids. But I saw that and this is what she actually told me. She said, were your parents first generation immigrants into this country? She asked me that before I said that. And she's like, because this is how a lot of first generation immigrant children set up their family structures. So thank you for sharing that because that resonated a lot with me.
Yeah. Thank you, Carlos. And wow, what a fascinating type of therapy that is.
Yeah.
To be able to do that. Very revealing.
Yeah, it was there were all kinds of things that, we just did a lot of role playing and structuring like that. And that was one of the things that, was really revealing for me. I think, when you talk about that growing up as, your parents were immigrants into this country and you felt maybe a little, gosh, I love how you said people aren't silent, they're silenced. How did you, because now you've got this following, you have a lot of people that read what you're saying. When was it that you finally went from being silenced to having a voice?
Yeah, honestly, I'm blown away every day and just overwhelmed by anybody who would read my stuff. It's like, I can't get over it and I don't want to get over it.
Yeah.
Because the things I write about are hard. And I feel like, I can't, somebody once asked me, a couple people asked me, they were like, hey, how do you do that? Can you teach us a class? And I'm like, I don't think I can reverse engineer vulnerability. And if I could, it's no longer that,
Yeah.
So it's a weird thing. I just started writing about like what I was experiencing, how I was feeling. And I thought this is the place to do it. I had a WordPress like when that was still popular, like in early 2000s.
You're a blogger, bro. Let's go.
I had Tumblr and then that grew to like 20K or something followers. And I'm always surprised that anybody would want to read about trauma, about grief, about, the work that I do. And so I'm always surprised and overwhelmed by that. That's something that I'm so privileged to see. But, I don't think I set out to be like, here's where I'm going to speak up and everybody's going to hear me. And this is where I'm taken back. I don't know if I set out to do that, but I do realize that in speaking this way, it is therapeutic in its own way.
Yeah.
And then now it's like, you and I are connecting right now in a way that's like a third space because so many third spaces like the mall, the library, being able to meet together and like, even with parents and kids together in this safe place where people can just play and not do productive things where they're contributing to outcomes. They can just be. That's shrinking,
Yes.
And so now this cyberspace, it isn't real, but it is, And so I think gathering that community, being able to say, hey, you too, I'm also experiencing this.
Gosh.
That's been so valuable. And I realized at some point, I'm not sure when it happened, but very gradually, I was like, I think I may have some responsibility here in what I'm sharing, who I'm speaking with, because I'm speaking directly to people. It's en masse and at the same time, individually, one-on-one. And, you on your platform, you're speaking directly to me. Here's one, Carlos, and you're speaking directly to me with your experiences. And so, yeah, what a turn that is to be able to do that.
Yeah.
What an honor it is.
Yeah.
And it's like we all have this access to each other that I don't take for granted. It's a very sacred thing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't know when it happened, Carlos, but suddenly I look at, I wasn't even keeping track of it. I remember when I had my WordPress, I would write like almost every day on it, almost like it was my personal journal. I had 0 views for like years. I was like, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to keep writing because it's what I love to do. And so, and here I am sharing with people who I think people find somebody's talking about loss and death. And I thought, there's no way people are that interested in this.
Right.
But you know what?
Right.
You know what that tells me though? People are ready. People are ready to have this conversation and want to have it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you're speaking to people, again, a mass of people, and also individually, right? Every single person that sees a post from you or reads your book or whatever it may be is having an individual conversation with you. Like it may feel like it's just one-sided, but it is an individual thing. And I believe the power of this space, even like a podcast, right? People are listening to this alone in their ears with their headphones on. And we have an opportunity to literally make people feel seen by having this conversation. One of the ways, probably, one of the main ways that you have helped people feel seen is by talking about things that you initially felt, who's going to want to read about this loss and death, and like who's going to want to do that? But I guess the truth is that you quickly realized everybody is going to want to talk about it at some point, because every single person is going to lose somebody or is going to grieve. And so tell us where, for those that don't know, where has been your training ground for learning everything you have learned about loss, about grief, about death? Take us a little bit into that world that you live in.
Wow. Carlos, what a question.
Mm-hmm.
I think loss was an early experience in the sense that losing a person is, not the only death that we can experience.
Yeah. It's good.
And so growing up, often as the only Asian American in the room in good old Florida man stories all being true, I experienced, what is very maybe infamously called death by 1,000 cuts,
Wow.
Just identity being questioned and challenged, being the only Asian in the room. And so that sort of death of questioning myself, I used to, I grew up atheist, but I used to pray to a God whose face I never saw and didn't believe in, to be white, because I thought that would help me finally to belong, to be in the room. And so, grief is something that I feel like no matter where you are and who you are, how much resource you have, grief is something that will eventually always crawl through your window.
Always.
And it will find you. And the losses that we experience, whether we make a choice and have to say no to something else, if we move, if we make time for someone, all those choices always result in loss. Even good change involves grief, because change involves loss. So I think having that growing up under this very turbulent, traumatic, with 2 parents who, didn't have capacity, and then the bigotry that I experienced, always feeling like I was displaced, and then losing my Korean language early on, so not feeling like I was here or there, and then having these authority figures, mentors who I felt like continually let me down, whether that was a pastor or an older figure in my life. You start to kind of pile up all these different losses.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah. And then in my early 20s, I started going to church. And then I remember early on, one of the church members was killed, somebody my age. And then I started visiting the hospital, I remember, and just seeing eventually it's coming for us all, the abyss, And so I think what I myself maybe was surprised by is that encountering death, encountering loss, I felt sadness, but I'm not sure that I felt like a fear that was paralytic.
Okay.
I think whenever I was in a room like that and able to offer presence or comfort or counsel, I sort of felt like I belonged in that room, you know? And that sounds like bragging, but there are very few times in life where you enter a room and suddenly your story and purpose click.
Yes. Yeah.
Very few of us get that moment.
Yeah.
It's like all the trauma and all the hardship and all the difficulty you experience, you realize that maybe each of those things were a lighthouse.
Yeah.
That suddenly brings you to this one place where it all makes sense.
Wow.
And I got that moment. And I remember when I first stepped into as a chaplain intern, I stepped into a room, and this is after 7 years of trying church ministry, always feeling like the oddball.
Oh, really? Okay.
I constantly felt like I was outside a window looking in, like, is this really what the Bible wants for us? I don't, because I grew up atheist, became a Christian very late.
Yeah.
Got to church, and I was like,
fresh. And
and I was like, this pastor's telling me to love these people, but not these people?
Yeah,
I don't understand,
Yeah.
It was odd to me.
Yeah.
I felt odd. And I tried for 7 years, but experienced all kinds of church abuse, leadership abuse. And, I was like, oh, I can't go to the homeless ministry my own time. I was like, no, you got to focus on, your people. And I thought, well, what if I take them with me? And like, no, you can't do that. I just thought, is this every church? Is this, didn't Jesus care about, anyway. That's a whole other
podcast. We'll have part two.
That's a whole other trauma, a whole other story. But when I left, I went to chaplaincy. I had heard about it because I spent some time doing prison ministry.
Okay.
And so when I went into chaplaincy to do the internship and then the residency, I remember my first visit, my first clinical. I went to a room, I was shadowing another chaplain.
You're an intern at this point?
I was an intern, yeah. This was my very first clinical. So I was visiting, basically, there's a private waiting room. I was in the emergency room. There was a family here. And I accompanied a physician who was going to tell this family, your loved one died in the ER. And the chaplain I was shadowing, I was just supposed to shadow. But that day, we happened to be stretched thin. That chaplain got called to something else. And she told me, you got this. And I said, I don't know what to do. She said, you don't need to do anything, just be. And so she left, and I thought, okay, just be. And I thought, I don't know what I'm doing. But at the same time, I'm going to give everything that I can. So I was in this room. Physician broke the news. I mean, this family was instantly wailing, this tiny little room. And Carlos, what do you say to a family who just found out?
Yeah.
Is there anything you can say?
Is there a book? Is there a pamphlet? Like, what do you do?
Right. Is there a phrase? Is there a magical combination of words that will unlock grief, that will solve this person's pain? And of course, there's nothing, right?
There's nothing.
All you can do is be. And she was right. That chaplain was right. And I remember being with this family in that room. The doctor broke the news, answered questions, and left. And I was there essentially to help them sift through the pieces. And I was there maybe an hour. And I remember thinking, this is so hard. And I belong in this room. And this family was sobbing all over me, and I was able to be a shoulder that they could do that freely. Yeah. And I bet they don't remember my name or my face. This was 10 years ago now. But that initial phase of loss, the cushioning that in that initial, very difficult, sudden open wound, that space can set the trajectory by which we grieve and mourn. It's so important. And you can see all the studies, but even just thinking of it in terms of common sense, think in terms of how we're human, the things that we hear in that beginning early phase really can set the path by which we heal or by which we are further wounded and carry a second pain of suppressing our grief.
Yeah.
And so if we can make the room bigger, then there is a way to grieve that is in itself going to carry us through the grief. And so I, as a chaplain, have a very small part in that, but I think, but hopefully an important part. And so, I can't say I'm comfortable with it, Carlos, but I can say I'm called to the work.
Today's episode is partnering with Function. What is Function? Function empowers you. You need to understand this. Empowers you and people all around you to live 100 healthy years. Now that seems like a big statement, but what actually is Function? Well, the reason why they can say that is they are beginning the process of helping people, starting with over 100 lab tests, okay? They test things about your heart, your thyroid, your autoimmunity. There's all sorts of things that just, in general, we don't understand. And Function gives you the data that you can actually begin to take back control of your health. Function is an all-in-one health platform that starts again with over 100 advanced lab tests. And again, it's going to give you the data that you need. The ownership of your health comes back to you, right? You get a baseline and then you can see how you can move beyond it. And it matters again because lifespans are decreasing and chronic conditions are increasing and rising. So what I want you to do is literally realize that this can give you less stress in your life and give you motivation to change things in your life. It has me. Okay, an exclusive offer I'm sharing with my podcast audience is this. You get $100 credit if you sign up using my code. So head to my landing page at functionhealth.com/CarlosW, okay? And you're gonna sign up with your credit applied, or just use code CarlosW100, okay? That is for every single person listening to this. And when I say every single person, I need you to understand this. It's limited to the first 1,000 listeners or followers who use my code. That's functionhealth.com/CarlosW. I think I hear you tell that story. Just now it was different, but just now walking my father to death. And that was actually the first time I'd ever been. So we're 7 weeks out. First time I've ever been in a room when somebody has left Earth, and depending on people's belief systems and structures, obviously, but has left, and I was there. And what you said about this moment that happens that I don't think a lot of people do understand unless you've been there. And I really didn't even understand it until you just said it. But there is such a small, tiny window of opportunity to set. It's almost like you get to point the boat in the direction that the wind is going to carry it. And if you're not there, or someone or something isn't there to point it in the right direction, it can go a completely opposite direction that is going to lead to much more pain than actual than actually needs to happen. Is this what you're saying?
Yeah, because even speaking in terms scientifically, and I hate to speak academically because so much of our work is by intuition.
Oh no, I love the academic part of things.
Because I was diagnosed with PTSD a couple years ago, a year and a half ago, but a lot of that has to do with when you experience a traumatic event. Your body internalizes it and it sort of physiologically becomes a part of you. And so it's not just by cognition and conscious awareness, it also becomes part of your response, what we may call a trauma response. And so I'm not a therapist, not a doctor. I want to make sure I put that disclaimer out there. But just from the research that I've seen, those trauma responses can become debilitating. We all know the fight or flight and all those kinds of things, right?
Right.
But there's evidence that suggests that those who after a traumatic event have safe people, safe spaces, therapy, whether that's verbal processing, or you were talking about the experiential therapy where it's not so much verbal processing, but
yes,
there's a physical, visceral experience where you are able to express things that were tied up in knots in your body. I did EMDR. I take medication. All these resources that we have, whether dance or doing martial arts or exercising or, being in group therapy, these are important things to be able to communicate, have our body be able to communicate and express the things we internalize. There's like conflicting studies even of like, if you experience a traumatic event, play a game of Tetris, on your phone.
Yeah.
Because that eye movement will help center and ground you. Yeah. And I know that those studies, there's conflict there, but at the same time, what that's really saying is if you're able to center and ground yourself shortly after a traumatic event, it can mitigate the effects of trauma. And so that there's like an interruption between when the event happens and when the trauma gets absorbed. And so it's never too late for anyone. I don't want to say that, hey, this open window and then it shuts and then it's too late.
Right.
Now, there is work to be done after that window shuts, but at the same time, that work, it still always can be done. And I found that in therapy now, having been in therapy now, I want to say consistently for almost 5 years.
Okay.
I'm uncovering more and more things, more responses, more things that happened to me, things I forgot that still live in the body.
Yes.
And it's not like I can just think my way out of it. Right. I can't just be like, oh, that event wasn't so bad, or I can't say, hey, just be positive and you're a good person. There's stuff that lives in the body that requires something deeper. Yes. Verbal processing is one way, but there's so many other different ways. And EMDR is one thing that I will advocate for. I know it doesn't work for everybody, but certainly for me it has. And so I say all that, Carlos, to say that initial window, the people who enter, they may say something that they think is theologically helpful or emotionally uplifting. But actually what it does is it's sometimes teaching the person to suppress their grief. And so if somebody walks in and says, oh, well, this is just God's will to refine you through the fire, something like that. Or, oh, well, don't ask for a lighter load, get a stronger spine, or pop culture stuff like cheer up, stay positive, be strong, it'll be all right. Don't cry, it'll make it worse, forget the past. Those kinds of things may sound helpful in the moment and can bring about a short-term response of looking like you're okay. But in the long term, what it teaches your body to do is, oh, this response that I'm having to it, it's not normal, it's not natural, I'm not okay, I'm a bad person. Begin to memorialize that, right? I mean, we know this, Carlos,
So good.
But to consolidate it all, that theology, what I feel like is happening is many of us, because of the discomfort of loss, when we see someone hurting, we genuinely want to help.
Yep.
So we try to pull a blanket of hope over their present suffering. But trying to pull future hope over present suffering will only smother them.
Gosh.
It'll only smother us. And so we need to let that pain be, as hard as it is to look the abyss in the face and say, this hurts. And it's okay to say this hurts. Yeah. It's okay to say that this is absurd, that this loss is irreversible, to be angry, to grieve angry.
Yeah.
And to allow our bodies to communicate that instead of allowing it to be stuck. And what are the ways we can do that?
I feel like we need 15 hours because so first things first. So I just came from my listeners know that it's not like I love therapy for the sake of therapy, but I do. I mean, it's been so helpful for me. And I did a 4-day intensive in Ohio, one-on-one with a therapist. And it was my first time doing EMDR. And I am, ask any of my friends since I've been home, I'm like, it unlocked so much for me. It unlocked memories that weren't even there. It sped up, I think, a lot of the things that was taking a long time for me to maybe get through. But you're talking about that, and then also talking about the things that people say, right? So again, I'm fresh off of the loss of my father, and my mother is fresh off the loss of her husband. And one of the things that brought tears to her, gosh, it was like 3 days ago. She just was like, I'm so tired. And I know people mean well, but I'm so tired of people telling me, Carlos, or Carmen, your dad's 97. You're 72. You've got 25 more great years of life in front of you. What are your plans? Like, what are you going to do now? Like, what are you got to plan some things. You got to, plan your vacations. You want to travel the world? Like, you did such a great job taking care of your husband. And she's hearing this, basically, it's what you said, throwing this blanket of hope over her present suffering. And almost, I feel like the blankets, they're trying to pull her out of it with the blanket. And she actually told me this. She goes, Carlos, I don't want to leave this grief. I don't want to. Like, I don't want to open up my windows until 2 p.m. in the afternoon. I want to grieve. Please let me. And I think that's what you're talking about, because I'm seeing it so clearly, even with my mom.
Yeah. And people mean so well, right, Carlos? I mean, it's always the well-intention that their intent and impact are completely at odds, right?
Totally.
And so you almost want to look at them like, hey, I got, it shouldn't be on me to educate you, but I got to tell you, you think you're helping and this is not helpful. And I've had to say that a lot.
Yeah.
I've been in rooms where I got to manage families and I'm almost like, oh, that sounds helpful for you.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to be rude, but I'm like, that's great. I'm glad that works for you, you know? But I recognize I have a lot of compassion for people who say those things because they haven't been taught anything else, to kind of harken back the resources and tools that we didn't get. I recognize that people are uncomfortable with death and loss. And so when they see it, it's almost like I got to fill the silence with something helpful to be useful. And people want to be seen as good or truly want to do good.
Yeah.
And when they say that, it's almost like, okay, now I'm helping, I'm fixing this. But by fixing it, they're inadvertently actually pulling this person towards a place they're not ready for and may never be ready for. In fact, if you think about that, even Carlos, the irony of that, like, hey, you can plan all these vacations now. My mind goes to, but I wanted to vacation with a person that I lost. Like, that's what I would have wanted. And now you're telling me I can go by myself. What kind of vacation is that, right? Even that, it's just like, I may have asked something like, what were your plans, To be able to talk about that openly, like I grieve kind of the unfulfilled adventures that I didn't get to have with this person that died and kind of the inside jokes and the unfulfilled promises. And I wanted to see them through this next sunrise and all of that,
Yes.
So how do we grieve that openly and talk about it in a way where somebody might say, oh, you can't talk like that because you're just bringing in negative. And in my point of view, I think that grief of what will never be, it needs to be talked about so that we can have people witness what we lost.
Yes. Do some cultures grieve better than others?
Yeah. Carlos, I got a whole thing on this that I feel like if I go, it might take the next 4 hours.
That's fine.
But I'll make it as quick as I can, Carlos. Here's what I've seen. And I did this whole like deep dive anthropological thing. And I kind of referenced it maybe in 2 pages in my book.
Okay.
But, the Western, what's called death engagement, the Western process of death engagement is actually fairly new. Funerals, putting formaldehyde in bodies, preserving them. And we're literally segregating the dead into a place called a graveyard or a lot, burying them 6 feet under away from society. That whole invention actually is fairly new.
Really?
And I got a lot to say in the funeral industry. Maybe there's like, the capitalistic engine is fueling that.
Bro.
Look,
I just, my mouth hung open for 2 weeks. I've never buried anybody. I've never had to deal with all that. My mouth was hanging. I was like, I'm in the wrong business. There are some rich people running the funeral industry.
Brother, it's morbid, but my wife's miscarriage costs more than giving birth.
Wow. Wow.
So death has multiple costs, right? There are multiple losses with that. And so I think what I'm seeing is in some way, whether it's like our capitalistic engine, profit-driven motive, the powers that be, the Western death process is very rushed. In fact, the average work manual in America allows an average of 4 days for bereavement if you lose your closest loved one. That means if your spouse or your children die, your work will give you Monday through Thursday off, come back to work on Friday. So I remember a workplace that I worked at gave 2 days off. And why is that? It's because grief is one of those things that we want to bury with our dead so that we can continue to become productive and consuming members of society. So when you look at other cultures in the world and even throughout history, you see like there's one people in, I'm going to get this wrong,
Sure.
but every summer, this group of people, they exhume their dead, sit them up, they have mummified them, and they sit with them every summer at the table and have tea with them. We know that in Mexico, there's Dia de los Muertos. You have the shrine of people and you celebrate ancestors. In Korea, we celebrate every year death anniversary. So not just birthdays, but death days. And so it's called Chesa. We do a whole service. And it's now, in our family, we combined it with like almost a Christian/Korean cultural service together. So with patriarchs and matriarchs. And you have, if you look at every culture in the world, there's a great book called From Here to Eternity by Caitlin Doty. I believe she was a funeral director. She traveled the world looking at different death engagements. She found like Viking funeral pyres. She found people shrunk down until they were able to become seeds or fertilizer for a tree.
What?
There are other people who decided they're going to die in a mountain and become food for nature. All these processes where people are face to face confronted with death, and it becomes a regular part of the culture instead of this sort of horror movie stereotype where we're scared by bodies. And so, if you think about that, we've been indoctrinated to believe that somehow death is scary. And of course, death is scary, but I think there has been kind of a shift or turn into believing that it's bad.
Yeah.
And I think some part of Western death engagement process, a lot of it has to do with avoidance, denial, and is profit-driven. All these factors together, I would say in the Western world, I give it probably like a D-.
Wow.
On dealing with death. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah.
But, forget the past. I got to move on. I even saw that recent article, the wife of, I think she had several kids, her husband died. And she said, I can't let my life stop just because some guy died.
Oh my gosh.
And you know what? I want to say, first of all, I empathize with what she's saying.
Sure.
That's angry grief. Understandable. Also, when I read that, at the same time, this other layer of, wow, I think she was in some way taught or indoctrinated to just believe that I just got to move on. Some guy, her husband, father of her kids.
Yeah.
And so, part of me sympathizes, and the other part of me is just like, wow, we teach each other this socially. In Western academia, Western thought. And so how do we get back to honoring our dead?
Yes.
And ritualizing them in a way where we incorporate everything that they're, because I believe grief doesn't make us smaller, it makes us bigger, to incorporate the loss, to honor the people who are gone, to take on their memory and to remember all the ways that they were good and bad. We take the good with the bad. And how do we lift that up in our own lives so that we expand?
Okay. So we asked the question and we get a D-. How do we get to a D? How do we improve half of a grade level here?
Yeah. I would say the main thing, Carlos, is just a very small step.
Yeah.
Is, when I say something like that, like, hey, we got a D-, I don't blame any one individual.
Absolutely.
It's
a societal.
Yeah. It's the way the world has turned, and all of that has kind of encroached upon us.
Yeah.
I think it's so important that we give ourselves and each other compassion about all the ways that we have been taught unhealthy grief, about all the ways that we've been taught to fear what grieving is. I mean, that fear is natural. That fear, of course, it's I believe it's right to be scared of death and loss. And at the same time, it's turned into a type of moralizing where we shame ourselves for it. So when people say those one-liner cliches, it used to just infuriate me.
Right.
But now it does still make me mad. But on top of that, I try to have compassion for this person because they've been taught that through decades, just centuries of indoctrination of believing that death is somehow bad and we just have to get past it, And so how do I have compassion for that? And then how do I have compassion for myself in this grief? Because I've seen patients of mine and their families like literally hitting their own chest, trying to stop crying, just throwing their head back saying, I don't want to cry. I don't want to cry. If I do that, then I won't stop. And I'm just thinking, maybe that's okay. you know, maybe that's all right. You know, when our own world stops spinning, the absurdity is the rest of the world keeps spinning.
That is the absurdity.
But I think it's right for the world to stop spinning, even if it's for that moment, you know, just to pause and remember. And so how do we have compassion for ourselves through that? And I think that could take us from a D- maybe to a C, maybe to a B-.
Sure.
That would not be acceptable to my parents, but acceptable to me for sure. Like, you know, just the compassion. Because it used to make me so angry, and I criticize people like, you can't say those things. And like, hey, don't you know society's made you do this? But now I just look at it like, you know, the Maya Angelou said, hey, once you know better, you can do better. Not all of us know better.
Right.
And so how do we have compassion through that? And that's why we have these conversations. That's why we teach each other. That's why we educate one another. That's why I talk about it on my social media. To bring it all back, the more conversations we can have like this, I think the more compassion we can have.
It's so good. It's so necessary. And I think that the way that you do it, and you do it in an honoring way, you know, and I think you'd agree with this, 10 years ago version of Joon, 10 years ago version of Carlos even, wouldn't have the capacity probably to approach this in a grace-filled way. But I do think there's a better way. I really believe you. I agree with you. I think there's a better way. I got the opportunity, unfortunately, to be in the room with two people that I loved tremendously in this lifetime within weeks of each other passing away. And it was the first two times. My wife's mother passed away in the middle of January, and my father passed away the 1st of February. And it was the first two times that I was able to be in a room after someone had passed away. And what you're saying, actually, this is something that I was able to tell my daughter. I'd never been with a body or a corpse before. And there was something actually a little bit like, I loved Heather's mom, Bridget. And I just remember like Dan walked out and said, she's gone. And we were outside, and, you know, we had them, everyone's crying. And then Heather goes in, and then Heather comes out. And I thought to myself, Joon, I was like, well, and again, I'd always been the guy, well, I don't want to see a dead body. Like I don't even like to go to open caskets. That was me. It was the morbid, the horror movie, you know, kind of thing. And there was some grace in me, some mercy in me in that moment that was like, no, you know what? I loved her. I'm not scared. And I walked in and I sat next to her for 2 hours. I just kind of brushed her hair. I just looked at her, I held her hand. And there was such a freeing and healing thing that happened inside of me in that moment. Again, I'm 51 years old, and this is the first time I'm blessed in that way. This is, or maybe not, but the first time in my life I've had to lose somebody this close to me, which set me up to when my father passed away, and I was able to like get him ready before the funeral home showed up. And like, I was like, no, I want to do this. I want to get him. And there was just, as weird as this is going to sound to people, probably, it was beautiful. There was just something beautiful in these moments after they'd passed away that I didn't know was there.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I want to say is like, you know, I think we close our eyes and we turn away because we're scared, but there was actually something beautiful inside of that. Have you seen that?
Yeah. You know, Carlos, you brought death the dignity that it deserves, you know, the sacredness that it deserves. And far be it from me to think I can confer applause to my elder, Carlos, but, you know, I do applaud you for doing that, you know, because, you know, it's when we can think of serving another that we can overcome the fear and insecurity that comes with that.
Yeah.
And, you know, and again, it's nobody's fault. It's what we've been taught, you know, that limited resource, or maybe it's even the myths that we live under.
Sure.
And to be with one another fully is to return truly to ourselves.
Yeah.
So, you know, you were completely Carlos in that moment.
Yeah.
To be able to be a son, you know, and dignify these, you know, our parents, the people that we love, they're such mountains in our lives, you know, and when they're gone, it's like, gosh, how can I move in the world without them now? The world is different.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And you dignified them completely. And yeah, I I can understand people who don't want to be in the room when their loved one dies.
Yeah.
I've seen all kinds of situations where when I hear the story, when I understand the trauma, like, okay, I'll be like, can you stay with them, Chaplain? Hey, I'll be that guy. Sure. Of course, people who want to leave and then say, okay, you can unplug everything now. They won't stay, So there are all kinds of situations. But I can only hope and pray, Carlos, that every person at the end has somebody in their life that can provide that sort of dignity that you did. I mean, it's so hard. It wasn't easy, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And you did. You dignified them in that moment. And, I think I've seen, for example, some families, due to their traditions, their culture, their religion, be very specific about what to do with their loved one after they've died.
Wow.
Because for them, it's not just a body.
Right.
It's their loved one.
Yes.
So there are very specific things like, I don't want them to touch the morgue, not for 1 second. I need to bring them to this place, or we need to wash their body head to toe, things like that. But, death is an irreversible situation. Mm-hmm. And in that situation, what are the small choices that we can make to provide dignity in an uncontrollable situation? Those choices, they really do matter.
Yes, they do. And even conversations in those moments, again, one thing that was told to me over and over is like, well, okay, it's just the shell now. That's just his shell. He's in heaven. And I can't remember who was saying it to my mom at some point, and my mom just yelled, "But I love the shell." Like she's just like, but okay, it's the shell. But I loved the shell. Like the shell is what I loved, and yes, I love the soul too. But I love the shell. Just again, not rushing past the beauty of the hard work that my father's body did to even get him, to the end. And I watched a hospice with Heather's mother. When they came back in, I just watched the beauty and the reverence that they gave. They were talking to her, okay, Bridget, now we're going to, and this is after she passed away. They were still talking to her. And I asked the hospice nurse, I said, how come you're talking to? She said, oh, I talk to all my clients that's the day I meet them. And then I talk to them just the exact same the day I say goodbye. And it's just what you're talking about, giving just dignity and honor all the way through the grieving process, and the death process. It's something that is fresh to me, which is why I'm so grateful that you said yes to come talk to us about it. But I think it's something that's so important as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Carlos. And what, like you said, I know that you hesitated on the word beautiful. And at the same time, it's true. It's beautifying. It is beautiful. It's dignifying. So thank you for sharing that and for your courage and your honesty.
Yeah. Well, thank you for, what you do. I know you've written a book. I know that, it's funny because you had mentioned, just a second ago about, just how long it takes people, and, there's different times and spaces for people. And I love that the title of your book is As Long As You Need. And that's really it. It's like everyone's going to need different amounts of time. And I think one thing that you've done for everybody listening to this is just given people permission. And I think that's one thing that we're lacking in our culture these days, is giving people permission to grieve as they need to. And so thank you for giving everybody permission to look at this part of life that everyone is going to experience in some way, shape, or form, maybe through a different lens and a beautiful lens.
Yeah. Thank you, Carlos. I got to say to anybody listening, I mean, we already have the permission. It's just recognizing that we have it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Joon, so much.
Thank you, Carlos.
How incredible was that? Listen, this is the podcast I need you to share. I just walked through this in my own life, and his words were so healing for me. They're going to be healing for my mom. She's going to listen to this podcast. And for any of you that have experienced loss in any way, shape, or form, this is the one to share. So please share this podcast with as many people as you know. Joon, thanks so much for your wise words, for your wisdom, and for your heart. Please subscribe and follow the podcast. And we'll see you next week on another episode of Human School.